Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian. And Julian, all I have to say is, bar weep, gra weep, nee nee bong.
Bar weep, gra na weep, nitty bong.
I had to look that up. How are you doing? You okay?
I'm doing fine. I'm excited, jazzed, as you might say, to talk about Transformers. How about
Excellent. Yes, no, this is a real... that's what watching this film this time was an experience, because Transformers to me has been something that's just been in my life since I was a child. And I mean, I think it's possibly one of the most successful franchisey things to come out of the 80s. You know, there's like numerous iterations of it, thousands of toys. But watching this film this time, I was a bit like, yeah, wow, brutal. So yeah, no, it was good. I really enjoyed it, but yeah, it was interesting to go back, and I went back and watched some of the TV episodes as well, the original Gen 1, so season 1 episodes, just to sort of get a bit of a point of reference for animation and sort of stuff. So it's been quite good fun. But yeah, so yeah,
it is a brutal movie. I mean, there are times where every time I watch it, I'm just like, you know, watching it this time, I thought, you know, some of my favorite movies are A Clockwork Orange and Natural Born Killers, and I'm like, well, you know, maybe that makes sense, because years before I saw those, I was watching, you know, Megatron gunning down people in close-ups of their dying faces.
Well, all I could think of was, yeah, the first part. I mean, the thing I said, we're going to be doing Transformers the movie from 1986, which again, it's called the movie, but it's very much a stepping stone, isn't it? Like, this film does not exist independent of the shows. But it was weird. All I could think of, especially for the first sort of like 25 minutes, was Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah,
it's because it's just relentless. Like, and once this film starts, like, it doesn't stop. It's like I can't remember the guy who wrote this, Ron Friedman. Like, you know, I don't know if he was involved much in the TV series, but like, it almost has that sort of like we've got 22 minutes to tell a story, like cram it in, and they just do that for an hour and a half.
Yeah, I think it kind of like sags a little in the middle with that. You know, I kind of call it like the Space Odyssey business, as they go to, you know, Quintessa and the planet of junk. But yeah, I mean, I have that same impression where you're like, you check your watch and you just say, you know, I saw this when it was re-released in theaters for, I think it was the 35-year anniversary. It's amazing watching it in theaters again, you know, I did when I was a kid. And yeah, I mean, you just kind of like check your watch and you say like, oh, you know, like how much has happened in the first 25 minutes? Like, this is like, you can't compress this more.
No, and that was it, because in my head, and I watched this not too long ago, like a couple of years ago, because I've got this on Blu-ray, and you know, so watching this time, I was like, oh yeah, like spoilers if you haven't seen it, but like I was like, oh yeah, Optimus Prime dies about an hour in, and then they go to the finale. Nope, like they clear house like pretty quick on this, and that's what I was so surprised of. And also to say, the levels of brutality in this film, and I mean, it's a PG, but it's only a PG over here because it's got a swear word in, which again was a bit like, I'd forgotten about that. I completely forgot about that. But I think one of the things I was confused about is the time frames and the time scales for, and you need to help me with this because you are the Transformers expert here. So I went back and I watched some of Series 1. And Series 1 seems to be very much sort of set what would have been present day in the 80s. Transformers, the Ark crash lands on Earth, 4 million or whatever years ago, is reactivated, and then they obviously mimic existing technology then. So Optimus Prime becomes the truck and so on and so forth. This film, though, appears to have, is a time jump, isn't it? Did that time jump already happen in the series, or does this film facilitate that time jump?
Yeah, that's new to this film. So the show started in 84. So Transformers debuted in 84, and those first two seasons, there's a sort of 3-parter, and then there's the rest of the first season, and then they did a big order of 65 episodes for the second season. And the second season is that second year of toys was largely focused on combiners. And Transformers was a huge hit. And while they were making that second season, they were making the movie to get it out into theaters. And so that second season just ends with, I think the last episode is BOT, where it's just a stupid episode. There's no introduction to this at all. And you just go into the movie and it's the year is 2005. Yeah. And you've jumped 20 years into the future.
Yeah. And, Spike's grown up. He's got a kid, and they just start introducing new characters from the off. I mean, is this, hot? Something I can't remember because I haven't got season 2, but you get Hot Rod, RC, Cup. I mean, are they all new?
Yeah, those are absolutely all new to the movie. Hot Rod, Cup, obviously Wheelie, who's introduced. Ultra Magnus is totally new to this. There are some Bumblebee is obviously a legacy character. Grimlock obviously is a legacy character, but pretty much. Springer is new to this. All of those characters were new, and these were. Another thing is that. Yeah, they had toys accompanying them. So this was the year where the toys transitioned into futuristic stuff, right? Because suddenly it was in the future. So before then, the theory was that they were, robots in disguise. That doesn't, always make sense when you have a mini bot that's a UFO. But, for this toy line for 86, the gimmick was okay, now we're doing futuristic cars. Now we've got futuristic jets. And so that was a real departure. And this was also the first time where the design models were created for the movie first. So until then, all of the toys, literally all of them, were pre-existing molds from Japan for previous lines. And even those combiners that had never been made as toys before had been designed for a pre-existing line. So they just imported them, shoved them together in a universe together, and then they create a cartoon model for them that in many cases departs radically from the toys. The toys still departed radically in 86, the movie year, but the designs came first rather than, figuring out Ironhide and Ratchet don't have faces, because they were designed to be mechs that were piloted by people, right? So, let's just ignore that, and some kids are going to be really pissed when they buy those toys.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's it. You can sort of tell that there's, I don't know, watching it now, like I say, that these second-gen characters, or if that's what they are, but these newer characters, more is done to sort of, I think Optimus Prime is one of the most iconic characters of pop culture. It's one of those, what do they say? If someone can identify a character from its silhouette, then you're onto something. He's that, you recognize that. Maybe not the Michael Bay version, that's just a mash of metal, but the original version, you recognize it. And the same sort of goes for some of these. They've really put some effort into it. Because I think Hot Rod is great. He looks cool. The design's good. And then the fact he turns into a really cool car, you're like, oh, yeah, so and it's one of the first things you sort of see in the film. It's a really, you can tell there's a bit more of this has got to be something that's got to be flashy for the film. And also, like I say, having a female Transformer, seems like I'm not going to say progressive, but like, you know, it's interesting that they've thrown that in there as a sort of a character. Didn't do a great deal, but
yeah. I mean, I first of all, you know, I'm in love with RC. No woman is ever going to compare with RC. I think, you know, I'm flabbergasted by, as you know, I have a big Transformers toy collection, and RC is one of the characters that I have the most of, different molds for her. And they never released an RC toy.
Oh, really? In 86? Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's surprising.
Yeah, no, we got like one that was a spider like 20 years later, and it wasn't until I think it was the Thrilling 30, so it's like 30th anniversary of the original release of 84 that we got the first like decent RC mold, and it's great, but no, I mean RC was, and they never explained why there's gender all of a sudden.
Yeah, that was what confused me, because a bit like, oh, so we're acknowledging that they're male and female now. That's weird in this sort of, but that's fine.
Well, and it's kind of like, so the third season of the show continues from the movie, and then there's an abridged fourth season, and then Japan said, yeah, we're going to ignore that, you know, 3-episode fourth season and just do our own fourth season under a different title. So the show does continue, and in the third season, it's kind of clear that like RC and Springer are kind of a couple.
Right.
And there was never really an explanation in the cartoon continuity for this. In the Marvel UK comics, there's a sort of embarrassing, there's an embarrassing, like, 8-page story, something like that, called Prime's Rib, in which they explain that Optimus Prime built RC between, you know, the 80s and 2005 to satisfy feminists, and then feminists protest that they weren't satisfied, and it's like our Prime is just like, well, I guess I can't satisfy these feminists. You know? So I mean, it's like the worst explanation ever. But that's obviously like, now when you look at like IDW, G1 comics and stuff, they don't do that. I mean, they have gender going back now. But yeah, it was and I will say, like, I do love, there are a couple moments with RC that are amazing, that I just love. And one is when they're, you know, during that awesome just like battle in Autobot City, where it's just, you know, it goes on and on and on, and it's so grueling, you know, and Hot Rod says, I wasn't worried for a microsecond. And RC says, then you probably didn't understand the situation. Yeah. You know, and she just shuts down this kind of like masculine bravado. It's like, no, war is dangerous. Don't give me that cocky masculine bullshit. And then there's another scene where Hot Rod intervenes and says, like, you know, I've got you, RC. And then there's another strafing attack, and she throws him against the wall and saves him from the attack and says, you know, no, I've got you. Yeah. You know, but then she kind of reverts to just the female character. Yeah,
the sort of the third, you know, that sort of, let's say, into the second act and third, like she becomes, you know, but that first act though, the whole first act of this film, you know, the reason I sort of say, I think like Saving Private Ryan is because it, like you say, it's a prolonged like war, like it's a prolonged battle scene, and it goes on for like a good 35 minutes of an hour and a half movie. And it just sort of, I mean, the one thing I'll say is, and again, I hate to nitpick these things because it needs to be, you know, it's there to facilitate the story. But when they're on, is it Prime and that are on Moonbase 1?
Yeah,
they've had what are the birds called? The sort of that go into Soundwave.
It's a Laserbeak. Spying.
Yeah, like they've known about this character for, like, you know, like you say, got on sort of like going on 25, 30 years. And longer, because obviously that before they crashed on Earth, and they've got no defenses against this thing. And I'm like, yeah, you sort of, you know, that setup at the beginning is like, you sort of deserve this. It's your own fault. You should have, you know that they use this character. But again, like, you know, it starts like Megatron is more brutal in this film than, you know, he's never like Skeletor levels of bumbling. Like, you know, I don't see him like, you know, some of the other 80s villains. But in this film, like, you know, they attack. There's an acknowledgement they haven't got enough energy on, so they've got to go do like a bit of a shuttle run to Earth. And then when that ship's attacked by the Decepticons, like, it's a slaughter.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it then. And I'm like, oh my God, like that's when it starts. I'm just like, oh, it started. Like, no one's safe. Who is it that's killed on that ship? Because I was a bit like, is it Ironhide? And because they seem to.
Oh yeah, Ironhide is the one at the end where
Yeah.
Ironhide has already been shot down, and they've conquered the shuttle, and you see Ironhide's hand reach to grab Megatron's leg, like to valiantly resist.
Yeah.
I mean, and Ironhide's been there all along, man. Like
From
he's
episode
one of the
1.
most
Yeah.
classic characters, and Megatron just looks down at him, and I love he says, like, such heroic nonsense.
Yeah.
And just blasts him with his cannon.
Yeah.
And obviously just killed. Yeah, I mean, it's really, really brutal. That, I think, was, for me, watching it, sort of even more traumatic than Optimus Prime. It was just like, we were in a different universe in which, war has casualties.
Yeah, and that's what was, like you say, before it's always been the death of Optimus that sort of that's has been the iconic thing that everyone remembers. But this time watching it, especially like I say, when they attack Autobot City, and you see like Autobots being shot and killed left, right, and center, it's like, oh my God, like this is like I'm looking at my toys and going, well, I don't need you anymore. I don't need you anymore. Like you're gone. Like it's a
that was the point.
Oh yeah. But like
the point was. Like Optimus Prime sold great in 1984, right?
Yeah.
He sold great in 1985. Almost no toy line ran longer than 3 years. I mean, Transformers lasted twice that long. G.I. Joe lasted, 3-4 times that long. But, it was like, okay, we're going to ditch these old toys, man.
Yeah.
We got to get, the next generation in. Yeah, I mean, and right before that cannon scene where RC, says that stuff to Hot Rod, she's pulling the body of Windcharger, obviously dead, and then you see she leaves it next to the body of Wheeljack.
Yeah.
It's like, that's Wheeljack. He's just a decaying corpse, like, and you have to leave the body. There's so many times, like they say, Hot Rod and Cup are still out there. It's like, no, they got to fend for themselves. We need to activate the city and get the defenses up. There are so many just brutal warlike decisions. Like, no, this is actually robots fighting a real war with casualties and brutality at a level that we never seen.
Well, that's the thing. It's so many of the deaths in the first act are just so unceremonious. Mm-hmm. They're just sort of like you say. Optimus Prime is the only one that gets that sort of level of in that sort of John Wayne sort of way. And it's great. I mean, don't get me wrong, like, it's great, and we'll get to it in a second, but it's this weird thing of the tone of this film that, again, like in my own head, when I've watched it, because I've probably watched it in the background and I've just watched it with the cartoon and I've, all this other stuff, and I've read some of the comics, like you see, I have a certain tonal nostalgia for this, which was slightly jarred, recognizing some of the things you're saying. But also, when it's accompanied by Vince DiCola's sort of like the music for this, like, it starts with, like, like, you got the touch. It's got all this sort of amazing sort of like 80s pop rock songs. And you're like, yeah, this is awesome. And then the war starts and you're just like, no, wait, what? This wasn't how it's supposed to go. It's really sort of, I wouldn't say it's sophisticated, but like it's willing to sort of like kick you in the teeth and go, right, move on. Let's, going to keep going with this. Because the music plays a really big part in this film. Like the soundtrack, I've got the CD as well. The soundtrack in this is ace.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's almost like a rock opera of a movie. I mean, and I would say it's sophisticated. I think, I have in my notes, like, we were talking about Akira in season 1, and I said, like, I like the animation more than I like the story. Here, I think the animation's at that same level. Not every scene, but there are lots of stuff that just is so stunning. And but I love the story, and it's a mess, but it's like a jammed together pack of where every minute there's another crazy idea that just has stuck in my mind and gestated and grown. you know, that sequence that you're talking about with the touch, this is the Stan Bush song. You know, I can't watch that without crying. You know, Optimus Prime is watching the city be destroyed, and he just says, Megatron must be stopped no matter the cost. And you have the sense he knows he's going to his own death. And, you know, the power rock starts, and he goes in, and then you see, like, I mean, he transforms, and you get that iconic sound. And then the camera is swooping around him as you're seeing, like, Thrust trying to run out of the way of his chat, and he's reflected on the chassis, and he's just jammed by this car. And then Optimus Prime, like, boosters, you know, squirt, you know, out of Optimus Prime, and he transforms into the air, and the camera pulls around him as he's rotating and blasting in midair. And it's just like, I remembered those sequences as a kid. Like, that stuck with me as, like, this is what animation can do. This is, you know.
That's something I've sort of missed, and I will get, because you're right, because there's a couple of things about that sequence with Prime that's I want to sort of mention. But the thing you mentioned about the animation and what cartoons can do, and yeah, you could do it now with CGI, but they couldn't really do it then, but they could now. The film starts with Unicron.
Yeah.
As well. And we haven't mentioned Unicron. We talk about brutal. Like, Unicron destroys a world at the start of this film. He literally ingests it. Like, he is Galactus of this sort of the Transformers universe. But there are shots to show how big this thing is. As it swoops around the sort of the planet-sized Unicron going through space, and then and then as he's attacking, what's the planet called? Because they do name it at some point.
Yeah, I forget.
But it swoops down, it goes through, and you see all these, you see all this, like, life going on this planet. And I'm just like, the scope and the scale of this thing is when he attacks, and you see the horns going in, like, you get a scale of what is going on, and it looks ace, because it's then replicated later on when Unicron finally transforms and takes on his sort of like humanoid, like robot form. That transformation is stunning. Like, it is amazingly well done. And it's one of those ones watching, thinking, like, I'd forgotten how good this looks. So again, like, someone's drawn this, and it's sort of like as it's transforming, someone's like, it's swooping past, like, metal, these objects sort of like shifting and rotating and stuff. But it's not a fixed image. It's no, we're going to float over this and swoop through that. Yes, there are some really ambitious animation shots in this, and I don't think that gets mentioned enough. I think so. You're right, but so yeah, that is a really good book. Because I'll tell you what, even the one at the earlier when you've got what's Spike's kid called?
Daniel.
When he takes off on, and I just really like it as a shot. He's got like a hoverboard. Which one day we might get.
Oh, God.
And he takes off on that hover shot, and it sort of like, he swoops one way, and then he swoops, and then he hits the rock, and then obviously, like, Hot Rod comes in, and he transforms and captures him, and then drives off. I'm like, it's just so kinetic. Like, it's just, there's just so much movement and energy, and you've got the grass sway and everything. Like, it's brilliantly well done. It's excellent.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that's an amazing sequence, and that's the Dare sequence. There's the other, the other song by the same guy who did The Touch, Stan Bush. Yeah. I mean, I think that, like with the grass, and I always remember that sequence.
Yeah, and so I will laud the animation in this is great. I mean, there are moments when they clearly cheap out a little bit later on, but that's just the way that it goes.
Well, I want to say something about this opening sequence, because, I mean, I think, obviously I'm biased. I think this is, like, for my money, just about the best opening sequence in any movie ever. It starts the other thing is, like, this is Transformers the movie. There's nothing subtle about the Transformers, okay? I'm the biggest Transformers fan, but I mean, the Transformers are a stupid concept, okay? The whole point is they're robots, they're aliens, they turn into cars, they turn into planes. Like, why are they doing that? We'll come up with some excuse later, right? We'll just throw these different toy lines together, and, I mean, you come up with the explanation afterwards, right, for the crazy idea. I mean, this is not a subtle franchise, right? And it starts with this subtle, surreal opening, with ethereal music. and it's a mostly silent sequence, you know, where you're seeing like Unicron floating through space and establishing, you know, this whole alien culture. And then, you know, my boyhood mind always races and says like, well, you know, how many planets are technological, have mechanical life in this universe? It seems like we're the exception. But you see this beautiful sort of like utopian planet, and then you watch an entire civilization destroyed, and you swoop inside Unicron and see it, you know, being processed and ground up for energy. And you go through this whole cycle of ingestion and turning it into energy until you see the energy ripple through the spires around Unicron. And then the camera sort of zooms off. And it's just the most staggering, like, I mean, to open, what a way to establish a threat. And, you know, like, fuck Galactus, you know, I'm a guy in a purple suit, you know, like, you know, and Unicron obviously dwarfs him. But, you know, I mean, I just think it's such a stunning and ambitious and cinematic and silent, largely silent. I mean, at least for dialogue, there's very little dialogue, and brutal opening sequence that doesn't even have any of the main characters in it. There's no I mean, this is so insanely ambitious.
Well, it is, and that's the thing. Like I say, because all this happens before you've even had the title sequence. Like, all that happens, and like you say, that's the thing that happens, because the music's great, and you've had all this, and then it's sort of because they sort of do the Transformers theme for the film, which is obviously, you know, that's their one. That's what they do. But I love the fact that you get that sequence, and then it pulls out, and Unicron sort of just floats off into space. And it is that thing of like, here's your baddie, this is what you're going to have to deal with. And then it's the and then you say Transformers, and that's when it comes forward. And you're just like, yeah, it is a hell of an opener for like a grabber, because you're just like, oh, all right, yeah, no, I'm in for this. This is great. But it doesn't, and that's the point. It doesn't stop, because then it goes straight to Moonbase 1, and then you get the whole sort of Decepticon attack, and as you say, it leads up to and this is the other thing you've said, like, you know, you've clearly been a level of brutality. A lot of the stuff that's happened in this opening bit has been played out numerous times in episodes gone by. Yeah, we have seen, you know, even in the title sequence to the first series, you know, you see Transformers sort of shooting each other and wrestling and fighting and all sort of stuff. And I always think there's an episode, and you'll probably have to tell me the more about it, but there's an episode where it's the first introduction. I always remember it because it's where Megatron and Optimus Prime finally face off in a sort of like, you know, one shall stand and, you know, one shall fall kind of thing, which is obviously then done for the film. But one of them has like an energy axe and one's got an energy mace and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, obviously that was done for the cartoon and is a lot more, I was trying to say a lot less brutal. It's a lot more sort of like, you know, cartoony, but it's just such an iconic image. And so when I first see this one, you're like, oh, it's going to be a replay of that. Nope. Like, this is like, at no point are they going to sort of say, and we've got plasma weapons or anything like that. No. This is a gun and fist fight. And it's so good. Like that bit of like Optimus Prime riding in, John Wayne style, to sort of like take them all on, and then sort of face off against Megatron. It feels decisive.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're getting at like the difference of tone between this and that show, and you know what you're talking about occurs in that original 3-parter. You know, the first 3 episodes, but you know I remember. Okay, so you know, like True Confessions, I was a huge GoBots fan. And, you know, one of the things that I hated about the Transformers, you know, I think GoBots are underrated. You know, the toys were filled with die casts. They were great toys. And Transformers were so much more expensive. And, you know, people, you know, obviously I'm a huge Transformers fan now. But, I mean, for me, the movie changed everything. And there's no doubt, I mean, even the Transformers episodes are better than the GoBots episodes. And Transformers, the number one thing Transformers did that was smart was having like all these different levels of toys. So, you know, you have like a $50 toy that's just like, I've got Omega fucking Supreme, you know, and all the kids of your neighborhood are like, you're the rich kid. We're going to play at your house, you know? And I was lucky to have like an Optimus Prime, you know, but, you know, but, in retrospect, I remember like this was the movie that changed everything for me. And this was the movie where I saw that animation, I saw that level of violence, I saw like, war with consequences. I saw, the rock music, and I also saw, what was never in the show before. Like there's no Matrix, okay, in the first 2 seasons. That's not a thing. There's even a famous episode where they have like an X-ray of Optimus Prime's chest. There's no Matrix chamber in there, So, this was all invented for the movie. Nobody says till all are one until the movie. And suddenly you have this movie that has a shockingly different tone. And in that tone, the Transformers have a fucking religion. Like they have prophecy, they have a religion. They have these beliefs that are, and yeah, at the end of the day, sure, the Matrix is a MacGuffin, right? But, that blew my mind, that you have this, it was part of like fleshing out, like this is an alien civilization that is different than us. And it's not just, I'm Optimus Prime and I believe in freedom in the American way, and so for me, like this was just such a seminal movie, both in my understanding of science fiction, but also looking back on the Transformers, it's this tone that I wanted.
Yeah, no, it is. And that's the thing. It's a step up. It's funny that when you see these things that there's a weird thing about this, isn't it? Like, you can't do this in Saturday morning cartoons, but you can do it in for the big screen, And there's been others that have done this. I always think of sort of Batman the Animated Series and Mask of the Phantasm. Like they were made by the same people, they're drawn by the same artists, it's done by the same, but there's a clear tonal shift, between those two. And so you go, yeah, but this one's a film for the screen, like it's a big film, and you go, yeah, but it's still the same thing. So it's odd, But yeah, like I said, that was what strikes me most in this is that tone. You're right, and it's it's a bit more sophisticated. It's willing to do more. So when Prime does go down, and you get that, and there's a great scene, and it's good. I mean, it's sad. I remember as a kid sort of being like, I expected, again, even as a kid, like I expected Optimus Prime to be back by the end of the film. And when he's not at the end of the film, with the credits roll, and you're like, oh, fair enough. But when he dies, and they do several things in this, which is interesting that they do with the things like he does. I'd imagine his eyes go out. The whole almost like the Terminator sort of thing. But he goes grey, like he loses all color. And that's like
his head falls to the side.
Yeah,
he can't even hold the Matrix up anymore. They do everything to make this as traumatic as possible for an entire generation of kids.
And that's it. Like it's a decisive death. Like it's like, oh no, he's gone. I'm assuming, does he come back? Did he ever come back in the original run in series 3 or 4?
Yes. So killing off and bringing, this was the first time Prime was killed off. Killing off and returning Optimus Prime is like a trope of Transformers. So in the series, in season 3, actually, there's a great episode called Dark Awakening, where the Quintessons reanimate Optimus Prime's corpse, but he's like a zombie corpse missing an arm, and he attacks the other Transformers and ultimately saves them by committing suicide and driving it. I mean, it's like, man, the balls the show had. But then they did bring him back at the very end of season 3 in a 2-part, that was called The Rebirth, where basically like, there's this problem of sort of like, I love Rodimus Prime in this movie, but, obviously like he's the Messiah, right? He's the chosen one that all Transformers history is leading towards. And he's kind of boring. Everyone likes Optimus Prime and everybody kind of hates Rodimus. And I think he was never written right. And so people wanted Optimus. And so they brought Optimus back, and he gets the Matrix back. And then in the Headmaster series in Japan, that was, their version of season 4. It's not in the American continuity, but in that splinter continuity, almost, right away, they kill Optimus Prime for a second time. And then he stays dead for quite some time and then comes back again.
It does seem like it's a bit of a trope. I mean, it seems like it's one of those sort of staple moves that you are aiming to get to. Like when you get certain characters, like there's a certain event that's got to take place in their their history of somewhat in some way. But I say as a kid, though, for me, this is pretty decisive. Thinking back to the toys that I had quite a few. I had a couple of the Gen 1. I had an Optimus Prime. I had a Grimlock. I always loved Grimlock. I think the toy of Grimlock was ace. The head flipped back and you open up the chest and the legs turn around, all that kind of stuff. It was a really good toy. I'm trying to think what else I had. I think I had a couple of others of the lesser ones. But in this, one of the ones I always had a problem with, and it's sort of is fixed is fixed in this film. Really, is Megatron. Now I love the design. I love the design of Megatron. I think he looks great as a robot. When he's up and he's walking back, and also Frank Welker's voice for Megatron is excellent. I think he's a fantastic character. And again, that iconic silhouette, you can't mistake Megatron. But the fact he sort of not only does he transform, he changes size so that others can hold him to wield him as a gun. But then even as a toy, I was never convinced. I've never had a Megatron, but I know someone who did. I remember the toy, and even thinking then, hey, it's a bit naff.
All right. Well, there's another problem with that toy, which is that like Ironhide and Ratchet is a case where they made a cartoon model that looked nothing like the toy. That cartoon Megatron, looks killer. And also his name was sort of based on the term megaton, so it's it just invites nuclear holocaust thoughts, right? But I mean, yeah, he's iconic, but then he turns into this gun and the toy has a trigger in his crotch, a little metal trigger. It looks nothing, these skimpy little legs. So I mean, okay, so all of the original Transformers were taken from pre-existing, like the GoBots were too, from pre-existing toy lines. And so this makes a lot of sense when you think about it, right? So Soundwave turns into a cassette player. Those Laserbeak turns into a tiny little micro cassette, right? It's not even a full cassette. It's a micro cassette. Blaster and those tapes, same thing. Those and there was also in the original line there was another gun and there were a few other toys like that. So Megatron, he was a good guy in the original line, but he turns into a 1-to-1 gun. So that's a line of 1-to-1 scale toys. Then you have all those Autobot cars and the Starscream and the jets, and those are not to really scale with each other, but those are in theory, somewhere around 1 to 60 or something scale. Well, you've got toys that are 1-to-1 and 1 to 60 that they just said, screw it. They're kids, threw them into the same line. Yeah. And somebody, decided Megatron should be the big bad. And so this gets into, this is just a problem inherent with Transformers. They try to do a better job. They do a better job of it in the Bayverse, but it's a problem and that bothers you or doesn't. And it's that basically in most continuities, the Transformers have mass shifting. Yes. That's sort of like Miracle Man. There's a parallel dimension that they're somehow accessing as they transform. And one of the most famous instances of it in this movie is as the Decepticons flee Autobot City, they all get into Astro Train, right? Who is a guy who's, smaller than Megatron in robot mode, but turns into a train and a space shuttle. A space shuttle is enormous, right? Yeah. Devastator, who has just bashed down the walls of Autobot City, is inside Astro Train. It makes no sense, and this bothers you or it doesn't. But
he's got the TARDIS. He has a TARDIS stomach. They've all climbed inside, and there's some sort of dimensional, space thing. It's not so much. The thing is, it doesn't. That's the thing. It never bothers me in the film. I accept it because of it was always the toy that bothered me. for that, because it was that 1-to-1 sizing compared to Optimus Prime, that was obviously like a truck. And that was but like you say, but I was never bothered by the fact that like I then had a Bumblebee or a Grimlock or whatever, and you think, well, they should be much bigger or smaller than things. So yeah, it's just a pick on thing with Megatron. But I still love Megatron in this. And like you say, they make some interesting decisions, because not only does Optimus Prime get killed, technically Megatron wins, which is interesting. Like he's like, because I mean, Prime is killed outright. Right. Megatron sort of is injured and he's gonna probably die, but he survives enough to be sort of like scurried away into as they escape. And it's only when he's sort of jettisoned, when they say, "Oh, we've got to lose some weight so we can get away," and they kick up There's a great scene, and this is what I love about some of the Decepticons, when they actually going to have a vote about what they should do, and they're like, "Right, we need to get rid of the dead weight." Those in favour, and everyone who's healthy is like, "Yeah." Everyone against. There's all the injured people. Like, it's.
And they go, no. Like it's so pathetic, right?
Yeah.
The cruelty of that scene, right? And also, like, talking about the animation, like, it doesn't actually make sense in space, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff in this movie that doesn't really make sense. Yeah. But, how they're flying and Starscream, holds Megatron, the injured, just devastated Megatron, says, like, "Megatron, how it pains me to do this," and drops him, and he's swept underneath the wing. There's something about the way that, like, it doesn't make sense in space, but that he's, like, just deposited like trash and just swept underneath that wing, as if there's drag, right, with gravity, but it's not. But it's great. And then instantly the Decepticons start fighting about who should be the new leader, and there's this sense of like, oh yeah, Megatron has been holding together this like riffraff that
that, and that's the thing. It's sort of like what I really like about it is that it's clear that like, oh, there's a reason Megatron's been in charge. Like, he's the one that they all fear, and it shows from the beginning like how brutal and sort of violent he can be. So there's a reason they all do legitimately fear him. That's the thing that sort of that's quite clear. And so then it sort of comes into that battle of like Starscream and the sort of the fighter jets, and you got the Constructicons and all this other sort of fighting over who should be in charge. And it's interesting to show that there are the factions within that sort of that team or that sort of side of things. Because Starscream's an interesting one, because again, it's like that all through the cartoon and even during this film, sort of like, he's obviously that sort of trying to be that usurper of Megatron. Yet Megatron always keeps him around to sort of like almost just to humiliate him again, or to sort of to give him a bit of a kick at some point. Like, I've never understood why he would keep him around, because it's not like he's even the best of the jet fighter, the fighter jet group. I mean, there's 4 of them.
So that's an interesting question. So there were 3 in 1984. They added 3 more in 1985, Thrust Surge and Ramjet. And then, but in the cartoon and in basically every continuity, they use the Seekers as kind of troop builders, Right. So like when you need stormtroopers, you just like recolor a Seeker and just go like, oh, they got another guy. And some of those have got the names like, Acid Rain and stuff like that. But, and now have kind of become characters in their own right, because fans have like gone back and be like, oh, I want a toy of that one Green Seeker in the first episode that was just, it's kind of ridiculous, but also kind of beautiful. So, I mean, there's a bunch of them. But it doesn't make sense that Megatron keeps Starscream around. But that's another cliche of the series, that like the movie is just totally overturned and invents the trope of like Starscream sort of winning and then getting his comeuppance, which is another thing that sort of happens over and over. But
again, and that's one of the things. One of the things I'd say about, I wanted to sort of bring up about this was I wasn't expecting to I was expecting to come in and talk about Transformers and how much I actually enjoyed the film and the animation stuff. But one of the things that sort of came up whilst watching this film, there seemed to me to be like 2 themes that was sort of striking me. And maybe it's just because of it's things have changed over time. But this is coming, not so much, coming of age is probably the wrong words, really, but it's Hot Rod stepping up, stepping into to become the chosen one or the right, that sort of character, is a theme throughout this film. This, because you got like Cup keeps sort of like, he sort of says he's going to straighten him out, even if it kills him, and then it's sort of throughout it's sort of him, little instances where each time he becomes a bit more, grown up and responsible until eventually he becomes Rodimus Prime. But there's also this idea of sort of like legacy characters, of like tradition and passing on things. And it seems to me like, the 80s was sort of when this was sort of wider than this was sort of happening. I think of like, Dick Grayson's Robin becoming Nightwing and growing up, and then you get, the other Robins coming in, and Jason Todd and Dick, Tim Drake and all this other stuff, and then Marvel have never really had it. But this idea of legacy characters is sort of seems quite new at this period. But it seems to be like, as you said, they'd gone for a period and gone, oh, we're going to get the new guys in. But they could have just gone, oh, no, it's been 20 years, forget those, here's the new crew. But they do, like you said, they create lore, they create a religion, and they create a story that provides an origin for these legacy characters, or these sort of, these new characters that other times would never have happened. But no other franchise does this. Like Masters of the Universe, Ninja Turtles, Ghostbusters, none of them really attempted to do this in any way. I mean, they probably, the only other one that could probably have done something like this would have been Masters of the Universe, because it was that wide. It was an entire universe. And it never happened. And it just seems interesting that, yes, it's to sell more toys, but they're really going to try and dig into this idea of legacy characters and someone being worthy of, this leadership role, and this thing of sort of like, it could have been Ultra Magnus. He's the biggest one. He looks cool. He's, turns into a truck and all this other stuff. Like, it could easily be Magnus. The dude's called Ultra Magnus. Like, he should be like, but it's the fact that he admits he's a soldier, and then you get this young sort of punk stepping up to become the leader, and it seems to me like that's a real sort of, it's brave, but it's a really cool theme to be introducing for a toy franchise, really.
Well, I mean, I have a couple comments about this. One is just the importance of change. Without addressing the legacy thing, that like Transformers in virtually every continuity embraces wild changes over time. I mean, it's something that I really like, that, there's a status quo for basically two seasons of the show, and then there's this abrupt rupture of that. And I think that's another thing that this movie brought to the Transformers. And virtually every incarnation of the Transformers has just these massive shifts where in some continuities, like Cybertron will be destroyed even, in IDW, Megatron repents and becomes an Autobot and, feels terrible for what he's done. You can do those kinds of things in Transformers because of the way that this movie described change in it. About legacy characters, I was 9 in 1986. In fact, I was 8 when this movie came out and I saw it in theaters. For me, I was possessed. I was fortunate enough that, despite abuse and some challenges, I was possessed of my own, intelligence, and that I was going to be part of a generation that was going to, sort of be successful, and I was going to be a punk artist and writer, and we were going to sweep aside the old guard, and the world was going to recognize our genius. And I just thought, everybody I went to school with was down with this. I don't know how I got this idea, but Hot Rod was that for me. It was like, Hot Rod was the, you will get through this. You will be tough. This will happen. And I think about, you're talking about it in DC. That's so much a part of why I always like DC, and in particular Flash. And without getting off topic, like, Flash in After Crisis, which was right at this time, 1987, you got Wally West taking over the title, and he was, 20 years old, and had no idea how to be a hero. And he was just the Flash from then on. And they did a better job of writing him than Rodimus Prime, who kind of like just become, you hear Optimus Prime's voice at the end, arise, Rodimus Prime. But, I love this. And of course, then Jeff Johns comes in and undoes everything good about the DC universe. But, this meant a lot to me as a kid, and so this idea of legacy characters and inscribing the possibility of real meaningful change in, a cartoon franchise like this.
Yeah, and it's true, and it's so true that it does speak to you in that way, that you can see that, because all the others, we will touch on this, probably, in fact, on the sister podcast, 20th Century Geek, in a much bigger way. But when you look at those 80s franchises, those 80s sort of, those Saturday morning cartoons I grew up with, I mentioned a few, Ninja Turtles, Ghostbusters is my big one. The real Ghostbusters was my jam. Masters of the Universe, Thundercats, all that. There's two of, obviously Transformers. There's two that I would say are still sticking around and are strong. And that's Transformers and Ninja Turtles. And I think the reason for that is that they've both gone through tonal changes, artistic changes, they've expanded the universe. I mean, you say Transformers goes off to have, you'd be able to speak more to this, but like Beast Wars, Armada, they've done a kids one called, there's Rescue Bots and all this other stuff. Like it can be, the tone can be shifted up and down as needed, and it still works. And the same with you had the daft 80s Ninja Turtles, which I love. Where Uncle Phil is voicing Shredder, which is, I didn't know until literally didn't know until 5 years ago. That was a shocker to me. That was, and now I can't unhear it. But that, and then you get the sort of the early, that goes away, but you get the films in the early 2000s Turtles, then you get the sort of Nickelodeon Turtles, and now they're doing, so they can just keep changing and recycling, and they can do things. And again, you mentioned the IDW have had fantastic sort of shepherding of these franchises, where they've sort of honored everything that's gone before, but then said, but now we're going to absolutely try something new, and we're going to have this whole different sort of take on it. And that's fantastic. And I think that's why they sort of see, these two in particular seem to, and Transformers more than anything seems to be the one, seems to really survive the test of time, when, logic would dictate that it shouldn't, really.
Yeah, and I think that, like with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I was a huge fan of the Mirage comics, and and they were violent and black and white and just a total world apart from the show that I also like. And Transformers had, I love the original Marvel comic. Which is very uneven, but and G.I. Joe had some of that. The comic by Larry Hama, I adored, and was a much more serious affair than that TV show. I think it's interesting that at that time, you would have thought that, Masters of the Universe was a huge thing. I still think it's going to come back, and, and G.I. Joe, which I'm still a huge fan of, that lasted so much longer. That had, was still making, these enormous play sets years after, the height of 87 for both G.I. Joe and Transformers. But I think you're exactly right that, it's this versatility, it's this embracing of change. And I think that, Transformers probably wouldn't be around today. There's this whole, if we didn't have Beast Wars, and there's this whole, in Transformers fandom, everybody's got an opinion, and, people have opinions about the scale thing, and there are Beast Wars fans, and, they're a minority, and they're kind of, not treated well by some others, and I always felt bad for them, even though I'm not a huge Beast Wars fan. But that so radically reinvented the franchise. And then, one of the frustrating things about Transformers is that the continuity is like there's a new continuity every 3 years, and mapping out even the G1 continuity is like a nightmare. It's so complicated, and there are so many splinter versions. But the advantage of all of that is exactly as you say, like not just every generation, but like every 3 years as new kids get into it, they have a different version that all kind of reflects mostly the essential characters. I mean, nothing could be more different than, Rescue Robots and the Bayverse, right?
Well, that's it, though. I think it's that thing, isn't it? That if you can adapt, if you can change, and if you can grow, you're going to succeed. I mean, I love Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters is my jam. I love the real Ghostbusters. And they tried it, they had the Extreme Ghostbusters in the 90s. And they had sort of the Marvel did their comics and stuff. But the problem with that is it can't get away from the fixed four. If it hasn't got, Pete, Ray, Egon, and Winston in, then everyone sort of gets a bit funny about it. It's not really been until the IDW series, and oddly enough, the game that they did for the PS3, I think it was, and a few other consoles, that people started to think, oh, actually, you can throw other characters in there, and they're actually quite good. And so it's starting to get to that point, and I think, when Afterlife comes out next year, hopefully, again, like, they'll reintroduce that. And again, like Kevin Smith is doing a continuation of the 80s Masters of the Universe cartoon for Netflix. So
that's cool.
Yeah. So, again, like they might introduce these things, and these things will happily change and adapt and evolve. But it's weird how, say, Transformers has done that so well and accepted so many different variations.
Well, and this is a golden age of Transformers. I mean, the fact that we even got a live action movie, whatever one thinks of the Bayverse, and that's another thing fandom split about. But, whatever one thinks about it, the idea that we got a live action Transformers movie was unimaginable, let alone that we'd have, 6, movies that averaged $1 billion worldwide almost. I mean, it's insane. And then, like in the toys, in 1987, we had, a 22-inch Fortress Maximus, and that was the biggest Transformer ever made. We've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We've had 7 official releases in that range just in the last 8 years, and with more on the way. I mean, we're getting every version of every toy that, made to standards that, and then you go over to the boards for, Ghostbusters fans or G.I. Joe fans, and they're like, we got one toy this year, and we're so happy for it, and you're just like, oh man, we are so spoiled as Transformers fans. Well,
it's funny because that's exactly what happened recently for Ghostbusters. They re-released, or they did a reissue of the Kenner, or the original 85 figures. And I got them. I'm really pleased with them. They're great. But you're right. I've had to wait almost 25 years to be able to say I bought a new one of those, a new toy for Ghostbusters, because everything up until now has been they've had some of the, like you said, NECA and some of those high end toy makers have made them, but there's been nothing that's hugely accessible. Yeah, but Transformers, I could go into a toy shop and they'd be there, variances of sort of everything, like I say, from the Bayverse through to G1 stuff. So yeah, it's an absolute wealth of riches on the toy front.
We're literally getting a 27-inch tall Unicron early next year. Okay, I mean, it's $600, but yeah, I mean, so getting back to the movie, I mean, you said this thing about Laserbeak early on, and I wanted to return to this because, but there's a lot more we can talk about, but I want to acknowledge like problems with this movie. And it seems to me, there's the Star Wars problem of like, where does any of this take place in space? Okay. Yeah. You're flying away on Astrotrain from Earth, and you jettison Megatron and Unicron's right there.
Yeah.
Okay. You're on your way from Autobot City on Earth to Cybertron, and I guess Quintessa and the Planet of Junk are just like on the way.
Yeah.
And, Unicron eats the two moons like relatively early on, like in the first like 45 minutes or so. And then I guess he's just hanging out on the outskirts of Cybertron, clearly within those moons' orbits until he decides to attack Cybertron like 40 minutes later. So there's that problem. And then there's the thing you brought up with Laserbeak, which is essentially like this problem of information and who has it. They have no defenses for Laserbeak, but it's also like Megatron is watching an edited version of the movie at that point. And, Unicron has these screens where he's watching, like the Matrix be passed to Ultra Magnus. It's like, is he omniscient then? Why doesn't he use that omniscience in other ways? And constantly, like, characters constantly know things that are not in evidence. Like on the Planet of Junk, they've revived Ultra Magnus later on, and they say, we've got to stop Galvatron. Where is he? And, Wreck-Gar says, Unicron, he's there. It's like, how do you know this? Like, characters constantly are doing this. And it advances the plot. And I mean, okay, I like all of these elements, but yeah, I mean, that is catastrophically stupid in both cases.
Yes. Yeah. It's funny as well, because you do watch it and you can be carried away with it, and like I say, but it is weird. Because the other thing as well is, like, they're on Earth. Like, Autobot City is on Earth. They have Daniela spikes up on one of the moon base or whatever. And there's a massive battle, and then the Autobots all leave. And, they've obviously been there for, 30 years? We acknowledge. So, but there's never any other interaction with any other humans.
Now, see, I like that because I'm so sick of like robot stories where it's like, that's what the Bayverse does wrong. Essentially, is like it's so focused on, like if I wanted to watch this, I'd watch, Commando again. Focus on the alien robot. But you're right that you don't have a sense of like, they don't say when was Autobot City made. There's a Japanese short that may or may not answer that, but. You don't have a sense of like, were the governments of Earth just fine with you building this? Like, clearly there's a kind of like integration there. And then it's also weird, like there are exactly two Transformers on Moonbase 2. There are, this kind of like population problem where, the most absurd version of that is the raid on Autobot City where they say we're outnumbered. You have an entire city. He's got like, 12 guys in a shuttle, and they're like, we're outnumbered, we're the underdogs, which it works thematically, but it's very strange.
It's funny because that's something that seems to have been addressed more recently, which I think, we'll get onto. But it's funny because the end of this film is exactly that. Like the end of the film, they defeat Unicron, they defeat Galvatron and all that. Obviously, it's going to go into the third series, but there's a moment when they're like, we've won, and it's all great, and we shall rebuild Cybertron. And you see, like, 8 robots, and it pans out to this massive planet, and you're like, yeah, it's going to take you guys some time to fix that. There's only 8 of you.
That's always the problem, right? Where it's like, how big? Well, I mean, the Transformers has an enormous cast, right? I mean, like, G.I. Joe and, He-Man does really... you have like a poster of all of those characters and it's like, where's Waldo? But, and that's one of the advantages of the show. And they don't do it much anymore because you have to build the CGI models. It's much more expensive than hand drawing, you can just use as many characters as you want, even though it's a more laborious process. But that's always a problem where it's like, yeah, what is the population of Cybertron? Like we see 20 guys,
Well, it's funny because I know they've been at war for millions of years and stuff. But like I say, at the very start of this film, you see another like Cybertronic sort of technological alien race, and that planet seems massively populated. You see sort of like shopping centers and laboratories and all kinds of things, and you're sort of thinking, when Unicron destroys that, oh, that's tragic because that is an entire planet. And when he comes after Cybertron, there's a part of me that's thinking, there's only 8 of them. It's not the worst thing in the world.
Well, that's really a great point. And I don't think I've ever thought of that Cybertron is typically depicted as kind of desolate, that it's got these like expansive metal fields and, giant pits. But, and there are different versions that are, you see a lot of troop builders, a lot of seekers in weird colors going around Cybertron. But, and occasionally people make up characters to kind of flesh stuff out. But, in the show would, but there is this sense of like kind of austere, sort of unpopulated, vast spaces that's always been characteristic of Cybertron in a weird way.
Yeah, so it is, and that's it. And, it's no bad thing again because I'm quite happy to go along with it. But it has always been a weird thing of like, who, because it takes you down that rabbit hole, doesn't it? Which we can cover off when we really get into Transformers elsewhere. But like, who built all this stuff? There's only a few of them, but even in the first episode, they've got the Ark, the shuttle and the spaceships and all the technology. You think like, it takes time to do this. You seem to be battling every other day. Who's building all this stuff? Like, where is it coming from?
Well, also, a lot of it looks really pristine. I mean, the thing of like this movie opens with, with that sort of monologue of, it's 2005, the voiceover, it establishes the Decepticons have won. And, like they have conquered Cybertron. And, for me, it always got to the idea that like the Autobots were cars and the Decepticons were military vehicles. I always felt like the Autobots were the underdogs. And I like that, even though they always win, right?
Yeah.
But at the end, it's just, it's also very abrupt, right? It's just, Rodimus Prime just says, congratulations, I mean, they just fly out of Unicron. It's like, how did you even get to the surface? Half those guys just, jumped out a window, basically. They, they flew through the eye again. But yeah, I mean, it is very abrupt, but it also sort of sets up a problem for season 3, which is like, okay, well, now the Autobots have won. The Messiah is in charge. The Decepticons are, stranded. I mean, they kind of depicted as a sort of diaspora of, whatever's left.
Yeah. And that's the thing that, because this obviously goes on for another series and stuff, and they want to set up, because, and obviously they've cleared the decks, you've got this new crew, which is quite, it's good. You've still got a couple of others. You've still seen, I think there are a couple of hangovers from Gen 1. Mm-hmm. In it, is Jazz there and
Jazz and Bumblebee and Cliffjumper are clear survivors. I mean, nobody knows, most of the fates of, you just kind of assume they died or they didn't.
Yeah. Because the other thing that I find interesting for this, I assumed that they knew they were going to get a series. Did they know they were going to get a season 3?
I think they did. There wasn't a big gap there. Like with G.I. Joe, there was a gap and they went with DIC instead of Sunbow. But they went right back to season 3. There was a kind of pause. And I remember the 5 Faces of Darkness that sort of continues this sort of 5-parter, which is a vastly inferior quality, even though it's interesting. It did sort of take a while, but it took a while to my child brain. It wasn't, it wasn't all that long.
So the interesting thing I find with this film is, they've obviously made some clear. There's some clear business decisions as well as creative decisions. We've lauded the we've lauded the animation, and we know why they did this to clear the decks for the new toys. But the other thing is like voice talent as well. you know, I mean, you've obviously got like, you know, Peter Cullen comes back to do Optimus Prime. You have Frank Welker doing Megatron, and then you have like Judd Nelson doing Hot Rod. Not the most recognizable name. He's, not the most recognizable voice. It's a very sort of, you know, quite generic, really, so quite replaceable. But then you have Leonard Nimoy as Galvatron, and you know he's excellent in this, but it's a very distinctive voice. And if you know that like Galvatron's then going to be your villain going forwards, like that seems like you're setting yourself up for a bit of a problem.
Well, they just recast the voice. I mean, yeah, I don't know. It does not seem like the people who made the movie, you know, I mean, they were obviously coordinating with the same, you know, sort of command, but they clearly were not worried about setting up anything. No. Yeah, but you know, not to mention Orson Welles in his final film, his final film credit. You know, and people have mocked that for years, you know, like, oh, well, his final film was Transformers, the movie. That was just such a point of derision. And Orson Welles hated it. You know, Orson Welles said, you know, like he did it for the money and he recorded these lines in, you know, a sound booth saying these nonsense things that he had no idea what they meant. But he was part of this like seminal thing that, you know, it's so cool that even at his lowest, you know, the sort of declining Orson Welles still was part of this like insane seminal movie.
I can imagine, you know, of those three that sort of I would consider to be. I mean, Scatman Carruthers is the voice of Jazz as well, but I didn't know if that was a standard thing. But like those three, you know, Judd Nelson, he's doing things like, you know, Breakfast Club. He's got all these other things going on. Like, probably to get his name attached to Transformers would have been a bit of a boon for him as a sort of a, you know, I can do voice acting as well and all sort of stuff. So I can imagine that being an easy get. Leonard Nimoy, probably a bit more of a thing. It's sort of like, you know, like everyone knows him as Spock. Everyone knows this type. You know, to have his name on the poster, that's cool. Like that's going to be the, you know, the draw. But again, it's one of those things. And then to have Orson Welles, because I remember Orson Welles' name being on the poster, and it's being a thing in the trailer, in one of the trailers. Because I went back and watched some of this stuff, and the only thing I can think of is like, you know, for a kid like me, I'd have been like, I don't know who that is. Like, I don't care. I want to go see the Transformers. I want to go see the cartoon. And I can only imagine that these names were, you know, Mattel and whoever the animation studio is going, or the production studio going to the parents. No, look, we've got these names that you recognize on it. Like, you bring your children. Look, it's got a level of quality. This isn't what you're going to see on the Saturday morning cartoon. It's again, I mean, the animation's one thing, but like, it's clear that adding those names are a bit of a, you know, look, you've got to take this a bit more serious than, you know, the VHS tapes or the Saturday morning cartoon that your kids have been watching.
Yeah, I mean, that is a curious question, and I don't know what the answer to that is, because parents hated this movie. I mean, no parent was going to go see this movie. They didn't see seasons 1 and 2, right? Yeah. They're like, I don't know who any of these characters are. What's Cybertron? What's Unicron? What's Optimus Prime?
What's a Unicron?
They just introduced like a frenzy of characters, and it's just like, we're on Autobot City, and they're like, you know, release the Constructicons. And I mean, if you're a parent, you're just like, who the hell are these green guys that are combining? Why don't they have more of those? And then a second later, they're like, release the Dinobots. And they, you know, you're like, oh, now there are mechanical dinosaurs? Like, what person on acid wrote this? I mean, if you're a parent, none of this makes any sense. So, yeah, I mean, I wonder, like, who was that for? But the other thing worth mentioning is that this film was a disaster. Film reviewers at the time, I don't know if you remember GoBot's Battle of the Rock Lords, which I have seen recently, and it is not a good movie, is, you know, got better reviews than Transformers. And, you know, and the reviews of this were like, they use the Dare to Be Stupid song by Weird Al. This was actually how I got into Weird Al, was through this movie. And reviewers said, like, what an appropriate song. This is the stupidest movie that's ever been made, of thrashing terrible rock music. And I mean, it just got terrible reviews. It bombed at the box office. It got backlash from kids for killing Optimus Prime. I mean, people were traumatized and wrote letters, and as a result, G.I. Joe, which was in production, wound up being released. The G.I. Joe movie, which is pretty good, got released on VHS, and the Gem and the Holograms movie never got made. And those were really like the three franchises of Hasbro.
So this was a sort of a watershed moment for them, because this was a risk. It's clear that, that what, like you said, the business decisions that have been made in the background, like you said, new wave of toys. But like you say, to kill off an iconic character, I mean, that's literally probably not Batman so much, but like taking someone as beloved as that and saying to kids, yeah, we killed that one off and we're going to give me this new version, but look, he's a cool race car or a sports car. I think that was, it's interesting because it's sort of that's how capitalism works. But did they underestimate then the emotional attachment then that kids had to the characters?
Yeah, or they didn't care. I mean, I mean, I think that what I've read in interviews suggests that was a directive, from the top, was to just sort of like eliminate the old characters and replace them with new. And, they turned in a movie. They did the best they could. They were serious about this and cared. But, that was a directive. In the G.I. Joe movie, I think it's Duke who gets, he gets killed. And basically, early on, I mean, he is taken out of action. He's stabbed with a snake that's been stretched into a spear, and it has impaled him, and he's got venom, and he's in a coma through the whole movie. And it is really clear, and this is true, that he was going to die. The point was, again, they're passing the torch from him to Flint, right, to the next generation, even though there isn't the same kind of massacre there. But they changed it. And they just have a scene where the characters go oh, good news, Duke came out of his coma, because they were kids are going to be traumatized. We can't repeat the mistake of Transformers the movie. So, yeah, I mean, they certainly underestimated, how upset kids would be. There are reports of parents taking their children out of this movie during it with the kids in tears.
Well, the thing is, that scene, I say we'll go back to it because the way that scene is set up with Optimus's death, like you say, they do not pull their punches. They do everything to show you that he dies. His eyes dim, he goes completely grey, his head falls to the side, and his arm drops, and he drops the matrix of leadership. And it's pretty definitive, but you can tell as an adult sort of watching it back, they weren't thinking, they were trying to go, like you say, full stop, here's a new sentence, here's a new thing. And you are supposed to sort of completely underestimating the impact of it. You are supposed to forget Optimus, and you're supposed to look at Rodimus, because, I mean, they literally sort of he captures the matrix of leadership, and it glows for him, and he's literally surrounded by that thing before they hand it off to Magnus. And it's quite clear that there must have been some executive somewhere that's gone, kids don't like this old, this Optimus Prime. He sort of, he talks like he talks like an older person, and he sort of, he was clearly based on sort of a John Wayne stereotype. Now they want a cool, younger, hip punk character. And that's what's going to happen. They're going to love this they're going to love Rodimus Prime. They're going to love Hot Rod. They're going to really, and I can imagine these meetings taking place, and people, that's how we're going to really push him to the fore, and they'll really dig him. And then obviously they kill off Optimus, and kids just wail throughout the rest of the film.
Well, it's interesting because they do everything to make that an emotional scene. of Optimus dying, right? I mean, it is prolonged. Even, Optimus utters his final words, and you see the, sort of, robotic pulse monitor, flatline. And I mean, and it goes into slow motion as Hot Rod grabs the Matrix. They're milking that, which, seems tone deaf, right? I mean, I don't think they do it today. Certainly not in that same way. But I mean, I think you're right that it's sort of like, well, we're passing the torch, kids will get over it. I mean, I like that there wasn't such a coddling of kids, in their fiction. I mean, I think we've made so-called adult fiction far too kid-like now. We're careful with adult fiction of like, well, we can't kill that character, or we got to give that character like a noble death, I think we're, maybe a little too careful about it. And, what's amazing is, I mean, it's unimaginable, this movie, without that death scene. If Optimus Prime is just sidelined from action and, somebody quick draws Optimus Prime at the end, like, good news, Optimus Prime has been revived, says Rodimus Prime, like in that final speech, you just, dub in, and I have good news for you all. Optimus has revived on Earth. It's a very different movie. And, I mean, it succeeds because it's so like unapologetically balls to the wall and crazy. And, so maybe that's a quote unquote mistake. It certainly, I'm sure Hasbro regretted it, but it's part of what has made this so unique and special and remembered all these years.
It's interesting to say. I'm sure there was an instant regret, but like you say, but without it, again, I don't think you have the rest of the franchise at all. If it continued for another 2 years, like I say, if you did a film and it was just, and there was no death, they just introduced a whole bunch of new characters, and like the Hot Rod remains Hot Rod throughout, and he's just sort of like the cool upstart in the new series, but Prime remains in charge. I probably foresee that it would have died a death. Like you say, it doesn't change. There's no new growth. People just watch it, and it would just be exactly the same as Thundercats or, let's say Masters of the Universe. It would have been great at the time, but you probably wouldn't have got much more beyond, the early 90s. And you'd have probably had some unsuccessful, revision in the early 2000s, like most of them got, and it would have just probably stopped there. Like you say, this is a cornerstone of the whole franchise. Without it, good or bad, it's what sort of thing a lot of it's built on in the future.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about that is that it's still a failure for the franchise in that sense of passing the torch. Rodimus Prime has, almost never been written well. Nobody really has known what to do with it. Half of the good episodes and stories with Rodimus Prime are about him struggling to live up to Optimus Prime's legacy. And struggling with, what does this mean? Or even outright struggling with, I'm a failure. I was the Messiah and I'm a failure. And I think there's been, I can criticize writers for a failure of imagination there, but this passing of the torch didn't work, and they had to bring Optimus back. So in a sense, that was a failure. Like you said, I mean, they regretted it. It's unimaginable thinking that, like Masters of the Universe would say, right. So in, the She-Ra movie, we're going to kill off He-Man, you can't imagine them making that decision. You can't imagine it continuing. And I think that this was a decision that in retrospect was a bad decision, but it produced this amazing scene, and the trope of Optimus Prime dying and kind of like milking that and making that part of like a climactic story has become such a trope in Transformers. It's even used in like Revenge of the Fallen, Bay just trots it out for the second movie, and it's just like, all right, we're going to kill Optimus Prime, 45 minutes in, and then he's magically going to revive, and it doesn't work at all in that movie. But it reminds me that like it makes an argument for strong creative mistakes. It's almost less important whether your plot is a mess. It's less important than that it's just so unapologetically itself. Make that mistake, but make it strongly. Yeah. And if this is a mistake, this movie makes killing Optimus strongly.
Well, it's not even that. It's you say that mistake. It starts, like you say, it doesn't pull its punches. Like from the off, like Ironhide gets slightly off screen, but or out of shot, gets shot in the face. And then you see RC dragging the corpses of other Gen 1 Transformers. Like, it's clearly leading up to that. And like they say, if they're going to make that mistake, like they're like, we don't care. We're going to keep going. Like, it's just, we're going to gun down characters left, right, and center until we get to Optimus. But it's weirdly, I'm not, I don't know where it sits in Transformers fandom, but like, as a film, having watched and gone back and watched some of the sort of the series season 1 episodes, and then watching this, like this film stands up, and it's a cornerstone of Transformers lore for me. I mean, I'm not huge in it, so what is it like in the Transformers fandom? Does it stand in the same sort of?
Yeah, I mean, this is beloved. I think it is. It's staggering. I mean, I've seen this so much. Every time I take a few years between seeing this, I can't believe how much it's affected my life. I mean, this movie was, for different reasons, the story of this movie is part of the comic continuity. It was part of the cartoon continuity. It was the only story that bridged both, because there was a comic adaptation, and the Marvel UK Comics did a sort of a sequel story to it before it came out. And it is revered. And I think, I also think that, Vince DiCola has talked about, like, nobody remembered him, and he would go to conventions, and these Transformers fans would just come up to him and just say, like, I love your music, man. I mean, there's a group called the Cybertronic Spree that is people dressing in cosplay of the Transformers, and they started by covering the song from this movie, and it's like the most amazing, just glorious fan thing you've ever seen in your life.
I'm going to stop you right there. I'm going to stop you right there. Yeah. Everybody, if you are watching this on YouTube, if you are listening to this, seriously stop. Go to YouTube and watch them. They are absolutely fucking ace. I went down a bit of a rabbit hole watching them the other day. Their costumes are outstanding.
RC is really good, and the Hot Rod sort of started as the front man. But I mean, they're the Hasbro is releasing this HasLab Unicron. I mean, obviously that's based on the movie designs. I mean, G1 continues to be by far, G1 is the sort of retronym for all of this stuff, before Generation 2 and Beast Wars. And, the movie is the pinnacle of G1. And I don't think anyone would really argue that. And you still see those G1 designs just are kind of evergreen. They keep coming back. There's a handful of characters that, have attained that same sort of classic status since, that have, are just amazing characters. But it's the G1 versions of things, and even G1, retroactive kind of reimaginings of the new characters that people want to see. And that HasLab Unicron, you do the math, and it's like they raised 6.8 million or something. I mean, I think they did more than that ultimately. If you run the numbers, like you're talking like around $10 million or something to produce of people saying, yeah, I want that Unicron toy that I never got in 1986, and I want it to be 27 inches tall. And Transformers fans, yeah, I think this occupies that kind of place. And Transformers fans are disproportionately G1, and of G1, this is the pinnacle. It's not that, if you grew up on Transformers Prime, this isn't your thing, but you probably still respect it because everybody does. Yeah,
it's where it all started, isn't it? And it is that it's because it takes so many risks. I just think I do love it. It's great. You say about Vince DiCola as well, because to me, although I know he did this, I know him from the Rocky series as well. So to me, like, Vince DiCola has sort of has soundtracked a large portion of my workouts over the decades.
Well, when I was watching the interview at the end of the re-release in theaters, and it had an interview with Stan Bush, and when I was a kid, I just like I said, I got into Weird Al. I would just buy soundtracks of any movie that I was into. It was hard to get. This was hard to even get on VHS for a long time. And, and I would just like go down the rabbit hole of just like researching everything else they'd ever done. I'd go through these old catalogs and like find just every cassette tape in existence, from these warehouses, and I would order them blind just to, see what else these guys had done. So Stan Bush, he actually recorded the touch for, I forget what movie it was, but it was like a totally forgettable kind of like, it wasn't a Rocky movie, but it was one of those like, sort of boxing kind of
80s sports movie.
Yeah, and initially his reaction of like, oh, you've repurposed that anthem for a movie that we expect to be a Rocky competitor, or at least relatively successful, for this weird animated thing that is going to disappear. And now, like, I made a music video, and you're just going to do green screen from the movie behind me. But then time goes on, and after a lull, this stuff just became immortal, and it's staggering the influence for a movie that flopped, and that Orson Welles was embarrassed by. Lots of people were embarrassed by, had to apologize for.
It's weird how sometimes a flop will end up being the cult classic, or will stand up, or will eventually even define, parts of the future. But yeah, no, I have to say, like, going back and watching this and doing a little bit of research around it, like, I listen to the soundtrack. I've got it on CD. I think the soundtrack is ace. Like, it is absolutely awesome. I do go over, like I say, the Weird Al songs on there. There's a couple of others that you sort of like, it's all right, skip over. But some of the songs on it are just phenomenal. And I say that everything about this film it's a cornerstone and a touchstone for the 80s for me, for like my childhood and stuff. And I tried, and I have a daughter. She's not really into, like, I don't want to be, it sounds sexy, but like, this is quintessentially boyish in many ways. and so yeah. I showed her some of the Transformers Gen 1 cartoon, that season 1 cartoon, and she just looks at me like, eh? First, she's like, she got her very own specific things. She's like, "What is this?" And she's like, "This be." Even at 7, she's like, "This is your thing, Daddy. You enjoy. I'm gonna go watch something else." But it's great. I thoroughly enjoyed going back to watch this film and looking at it with a more critical eye and seeing the flaws, but still loving it. I think that's what's important.
Yeah, I'm resisting the urge to say, because I'm so happy that there's decent media for girls now, and that's a thing that people care about. So I'm therefore resisting the urge to say, yeah, you like Pokemon, okay? So shut the hell up, right? That would not be kind of me. you know, but I love that, you know, the cartoons have evolved and changed. I wonder what you think of Gem and the Holograms, you know, probably just that it primitively done.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm amazed by how almost everything in this has become sort of iconic in a way, you know, for Transformers fans. You know, that design, I mean, talk about the lesser stuff. We've talked about like, you know, the hot rod sequence. We've talked about the Unicron transformation sequence. We haven't even mentioned that sequence in which Unicron rebuilds Megatron, and you know, whereas, you know, you rotate around, and you know, it's just it's mind blowing. And then you know, I mean, Megatron sliding down the sort of, you know, claws of Unicron, you know, as he's being tortured. You know, even during that kind of like Space Odyssey stuff that I think is a little weaker. I mean, the Junkion planet of just like junk everywhere. That design of Quintessa, that just like weird planet where it's like, what is going on with that? The weird Quintesson ship, you know, the you know, that look of like the first thing Unicron does after he transforms is just like takes his hand and just grabs the surface of Cybertron and like foreshortening and just tears through it with these giant fingers. I mean, over and over. I mean, I love the underwater sequence. You know, it's a lesser sequence by comparison, but you know, watching Hot Rod fight, you know, these you know, robotic sort of tendrils and robotic piranha, and it goes to Cup, who's fighting a giant robotic squid, and he blows his eye out, and it squirts ink as it goes away, and then Cup brutally says, you know, "Fix me." Yeah. You know, it's like amazing. You know, and I could do without Wheelie, but you know, the famous, you know, idea of sort of the Quintessons putting people on trial and the sort of mockery of logic, which, you know, now is the world we all live in, of sort of guilty or innocent, the sentence is death, right? You know, this upside down world like that. You know, Hot Rod smashing that Quintesson's teeth out, and it, you know, the teeth just crumble, and then a Quintesson rips off another Quintesson's face, and just awesome animation. The death of Starscream as Galvatron, you know, just returns and blasts Starscream, and you see him crumble into ash. He doesn't even get a last word. He just crumbles into ash, and the crown falls, and Galvatron steps on the crown with contempt. I don't need these trappings of power. I am power. You know, there's so much in this that just might be wacky, crazy ideas that have been stitched together in this Frankenstein monster of an orgy of rock and roll and, you know, craziness. But all of those ideas have lived on and become sort of iconic for fans of this movie.
What you say about the animation again? There's a couple of things that I want to touch on. Is that transformation of Megatron to Galvatron? When you watch it back on, if you go back and watch it, say like YouTube, like, you know, VHS quality, like it looks okay, it looks good. It's you know, it's got neon pink, sort of like that blueprint, sort of like framework of it. It goes into his insides and sort of how it works. Looks great. Well, it looks fine. When they've done the Blu-ray and they've like cleaned it all up and they've done like the 4K scan. Oh my god, it looks awesome! Like it's pinned. It looks absolutely fantastic. And it's such detail of stuff, and they've gone on it as well, which is so cool. So I do love that. The other thing I was going to say, you say about there's like the Sharkicons and all these other little weird characters that sort of go into it. But I kind of like as well the relationship between Hot Rod and Cup. You know, this thing of this old sort of like veteran who God knows what's happened to him for the last 4 million years, but besides the point. And Hot Rod, like, you know, him that relationship's actually kind of cool. It goes into almost like buddy cop territory, you know, of sort of but it's again this idea of legacy, of passing on the knowledge. And they have like a really sort of touching relationship of, you know, almost like, you know, there's a grudgingness between them that grows into respect and all this other thing, and it's kind of cool. But talking about the brutality of this film, Other thing I was just I really like is Daniel gets to use one of Spike's exosuits. And you see him get used to it, and he gets to pick up some stuff, and then you find out that transforms into a little car as well. Like, that's awesome. That was ace.
Why not? Right?
Yeah. And you see him like driving around in that, and I'm like, that's so cool. But the end of the film, when they finally get into Unicron, and you see sort of like, there's obviously, you've already seen him devouring a planet for energy. But there's more than that. The dude's like a gerbil. Like, he must keep things in his cheeks or something, because you've then got like a conveyor belt of robots, or like, biological robots, on like a conveyor belt, clawed up, but they're dropped into acid. And you see two like mechanical and things dropped into acid, and it's like the end of Terminator 2. Like,
yeah.
These two robots thrashing around and melting into the acid, where he's obviously dissolving them and digesting them. And then all of a sudden it becomes there's a little mini moment of like a countdown, because you find out that Spike's on there and some of the others. I forget who else is on there.
Bumblebee's right behind it, and then Jazz and Cliffjumper, which they barely don't mention in this show, but like Spike is at the front. Like, this is the audience identification character for all of season 1 and season 2. And he is on a claw about to be dropped into a smelting pool that you've already seen guys' faces melting off in. Yeah. And you're like, with pleading desperately, like, also, like, they don't hook back, like, Daniel, now's the time. No. It's like, Daniel, now. Like, he knows he's about to die, and you're going to watch your dad die.
Well, they don't, because you're not sure, because Daniel finally figures out how to use the blasters in the suit, and he shoots it, and the door falls. But only one of the doors, only part of the cover falls. So when they drop, and you see Daniel thinks they're done. Like, Daniel turns, and you see tears rolling down his face, and obviously, he has saved them. But again, like, that is a moment where I'm watching it as an adult, thinking like, wow, yeah. This is verging on like horror at times, and animated beautifully. Like, when you do get the close-up shots of Spike's face, like I say, that's like, they really aren't pulling back on the terror. Like, it is a cartoon, but he's wide-eyed, he's sweating, he's like screaming. Like I say, like, Daniel, don't mess this up now. It's there's so much going on in this film that's just incredible.
Yeah, I'm always annoyed by in that scene that, like, you get you barely see Jazz and Cliffjumper, and then it's like, shouldn't there be like an infinite line of people falling on the lid now? But you just see the 4 guys that matter, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. It is done well. I love a couple things I haven't mentioned. That part of the inside of Unicron, with like, it's so imaginative, and I don't know how much sense it makes, but, there are these tunnels, and they're falling on spikes, and, they have like defensive claws that shoot out and are chasing them, and then there's water that's released, and you kind of follow from the point of view of, Hot Rod and Daniel. There's Daniel rushed down in the water and falling, and and then you see Galvatron hiding in the darkness, and you just see the glow of the Matrix. I mean, there's so much that's so well done there. And then I was thinking on the planet of junk, as the Junkions attack. I don't know why they wait until after, Galvatron is attacked, having just been told in the previous scene, like, he's just crossed all that space. Doesn't matter. But in the Junkion attack, like, how they animate that, they kind of like work in pairs. They turn into motorcycles, right? And they work in pairs. And when one of them wipes out or is like thrown off, they both transform, and the other guy becomes the rider. It's like, it's my turn to ride, dude. It's so beautiful.
It is. There's some great, again, just some great ideas throughout all this. You say about Unicron. One of the things I actually really like about it is because, again, it's for the convenience of the film, really. I suppose it gives them a landscape in which to do things. But he isn't. He's a giant, like, super giant alien robot. Like, I don't know how his sort of, his mechanical internals work. Like, if you look at a human body, yeah, there's going to be some sort of like, if he's melting things down to gain energy and sort of sustenance, it's got to be transported around somehow. So, we see a liquid, don't know what it is.
Right.
And also, like those things that we've got, white blood cells that keep our body safe. Why wouldn't he have some sort of defense mechanism inside it? Like, it's there. It's sort of like, probably hasn't given that much thought, but you can justify it in some sort of way, which I kind of like. But the other thing,
I do like the smelting of the beginning. Like they see, like you see those pistons crunching, the initial planet, and then I do wonder, like, it's very inefficient to like have that system and then be like, wait, we're gonna put everybody on hooks and have them on a conveyor belt and drop them in a bit of that. But you're right. I mean, it just works dramatically. Right?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's it. Because the other thing as well, that scene with Galvatron when he steps out the shadow and you see the eyes and the matrix of leadership, and he sort of confronts Hot Rod. It really made me think of Empire Strikes Back, of Darth Vader sort of facing off against Luke, and it just jumped in. Watching this time, I was like, I don't know if that's intentional, but it just had that feeling of sort of like, almost inviting him to the dark side. Like, look, because he actually says, doesn't he? Look, we can join together to fight our common enemy, and there's no sort of what can be beyond that. But it's a nice sort of like temptation for Hot Rod, but he's obviously got to be the true blue hero at the end of the day. But it's a great scene. It's a really well done scene.
I think that this is very influenced by Star Wars.
Yeah.
And I didn't see that for years. But, because I was a kid and, I like Star Wars. But, I like this better than I like Star Wars, to be honest. But I think this might be the most successful sort of riff on Star Wars. Hot Rod is Luke, right? He's the young kid who hasn't found his place, and who through the mystical power of the Matrix / the Force achieves his destiny as savior of the galaxy. Unicron is the Death Star. He's literally a death planet.
Yeah.
Obviously, sort of Galvatron is, I'm not sure we knew that at the time, but like we could even say like Megatron is Anakin, right? And Darth Vader is Galvatron. There are a whole lot of parallels between them, but it's done in this, once you turn things into robots, nothing looks like the same story, right? It's like the violence, like you couldn't get, even if this were animated, my God, if you imagine, like, even at the end, Unicron, as he's grabbing his torso as holes are torn through his body from the inside, from the Matrix, trying to contain, it's like you're trying to keep your guts inside. And then his leg blows off and his head blows off. And it's the best ending, right? I love that ending. It's true. The ending is just kind of like brief, like, till all are one, we've reconquered Cybertron off screen, but then the camera just keeps pulling back and pulling back and pulling back until you see the severed head of Unicron rotating like, the moons once did around Cybertron. And that becomes a major feature of the third series. That's, that whole severed Unicron head is also, with its eyes blown out, is also like a sort of iconic image now.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, like, like you say, I don't know how much thought was put into some of these things, but it's just sort of like, in some cases, lightning in a bottle, isn't it? They just capture that right image, and it just works. It just works so well. Look at the time. So I think we're going to sort of look at to wrap up now, because there's so much more we could do, but I think we are going to do a sort of a sister episode. We're going to delve into the wider Transformers universe from 1984 onwards, even right up to I don't know if you've seen it yet, but on Netflix there's the War of Cybertron 6-part anime, which we will definitely talk about, because I watched that and I thoroughly enjoyed it. We will do that on 20th Century Geek. But fun like this, so just final thoughts then.
Please tune in.
Yes, please go and find it. But final thoughts then on Transformers the movie 1986.
This movie changed my life. I adore it to this day. I am always confused and surprised by the fact that I am like a really structural thinker and a really structural creative writer myself. And the stuff that I like the most is, like we talked about Videodrome, where it's like, none of that really makes sense. I mean, Transformers, like, it's filled with problems, but it just takes every crazy idea and just throws it in. It's like, robotic sharks, why not? Like, that's cool, dude. Just put it in. There's so much that should have just been censored, not out of good taste, but just logic that just gets in here. And if it didn't work, if it didn't have like, that sort of like manic energy, I mean, I feel like I'm, my brain is in a manic state and I'm on acid when I watch this movie, and in the best possible way. So, I mean, this is, I can't imagine my life without this movie. What about you?
No, I don't think it's. I was a little younger in 86, but I caught this. Transformers was huge for me as a kid, and I remember watching. I do still, this film does have that sort of nostalgia feel. Like, it takes me back. Watching this film isn't just me watching the film sat somewhere. Like, this takes me back to when I was younger. Like, I get like a pang. Like, it's a weird feeling. Like, when I see certain things in this film, that really do resonate, and you have almost like a sense memory from them. And and that's just from a joy of seeing how cool things are, and like, the music, some of the animation, some of the scenes. But watching it this time with that sense of sort of, to try and understand or to look at these things, like, more's there. Like you say, whether it was intentional or not, but there's so much more there. This idea of legacy characters, of sort of like stepping up, and the change that's going through, the risks that were clearly taken by Hasbro and stuff, and whether they paid off or not. But like, this is quite a brave thing. And so to see it now, I can understand why people of a younger age will come to this and go, yeah, not for me. I can see why. Because animations and storytelling, animated storytelling, has progressed and become more sophisticated and better and more diverse. But it starts in places like this. I mean, this isn't Disney doing their sort of stuff. This is a toy company looking to sell more toys, taking a real leap. And so, I don't know, there's just something about this film that I really enjoy. And again, it's sort of, I've got it on Blu-ray, and it stands on my shelf proudly because I think it's a fantastic film. So, no, I've really enjoyed going back to this and discussing it.
Well, what a joy it's been, and I hope everyone will tune into 20th Century Geek and listen to the companion episode. Yes,
it might even be that comes first. I'm not sure. It might be that comes out first, but yeah, there's been
I suspect.
Yeah. But yes, so that's it. But if you do want to talk to us about Transformers, tell us who your favorite Transformer is. How did you get into it? What's your favorite iteration of the series? Find us on Twitter, so at PodTimeSpace, and let us know. Engage with us. Let's see what your thoughts are, because I really want to know.
Tell me how biased and full of shit I am.
Yes, yeah.
Because I know I am. I mean, I would not put up with half of these just errors and, like zipping around. Where the hell was any of this stuff in so much stuff?
It's sometimes we can be sort of our views can be slightly clouded, but it's fine. That's what passion and everything's about. But yeah, I'd love to see what other people think about this and where does it sort of sit for those. But what we've got next? What have we got next? I think it's another thing that's been being revised. I was just thinking quickly through my head. It's going to be a non heinous episode. It's going to be bodacious. We are going to be talking Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Obviously, they've come back. They've done it 30 years later with Face the Music. But yeah, we're going to go back to the very first film, and we're going to have a history lesson. So, as always, Julian, thank you very much. And
thank you, my fellow geek. It's a thrill to go back and relive stuff like this in Bill and Ted, and recollect and find what's working and what isn't, and discover new films as I continuously do. So I'm honored to be here. Always honored to be doing this with you. It's one of the real joys of my life, and I hope people get a fraction of the joy I get out of it.
Yeah, always puts a smile on my face after when doing these shows. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we will talk again soon.